Good shifting comes through a lot of practice, and that means the students are going to need a lot of repetitions to become good at shifting, and those repetitions have to be of high quality for the shifting to become good. If the students are only shifting when it comes up in the concert music, well, then a lot of students may never ever shift going all the way through high school. It's a possibility. And so I think it's better to build some exercises into the curriculum so that students get a lot of repetitions with shifting and that you can monitor them to make sure that they're using the right technique when they're shifting. I also think it's a good idea to rotate your first and second violin sections so that everybody gets an opportunity to play first violin or second violin, and it's not just an equity thing in the classroom. It's more so that everybody gets the same experience of playing higher notes and lower notes so that skills don't get neglected. So it's not so much a social equity thing as it is like a technique equity thing, to just make sure that nobody's slipping through the cracks and that everybody's held accountable and learns how to shift eventually. I want to talk about scales. And scales can be very useful because they can be played as a homogeneous exercise to where everybody in the class is playing the same notes in different octaves, but the same notes regardless of which instrument they're playing. And it's easy to set up, and scales are easy to hear because they all sound similar because they're intervallically the same from one scale to the next. Everybody knows what a scale is supposed to sound like, so it's easier to tune that way. And you can just set the students up and they can go. If your students are playing scales every day in class, then you're at least covering one component of the accountability, which is the repetition. Just make sure that you're also covering the quality that goes along with it. If you're going to do scales, I would suggest that they become a daily activity and not just assign them as homework. I think very few of your students are going to actually practice scales at home. If you take your class and just divide it up into a pie chart and you say, okay, what percentage of my class is actually going to go home and practice scales? Well, it's going to be a very small slice of the pie. In fact, it's going to be like when your grandmother says, oh, I just want a little bit of pie. I don't want to, and then that piece that you cut for is always too big. You know, you're trying to get it wafer thin, atomically thin, and it's just that's going to be your percentage of students that are actually going to attempt to practice a scale at home. And then we can divide that into a new pie chart, and we could say, okay, students who are practicing their scales at home, how many of them are taking the time and care to practice them in a quality way? Okay, so again, it's going to be a very small percentage of the students who will even bother to take it home in the first place. So a percentage of students are going to be correctly practicing scales at home, which indicates to me that it needs to be, if you're going to do it this way, they need to be a daily activity in class, and you need to monitor them to make sure that they're doing it correctly. Now, unfortunately, if you just take the metronome and turn it on and then go take attendance or whatever while the students are playing, the students are going to check out, and they're probably not going to play the scales very well. They're probably not going to be in tune with good sound, and they're probably not going to be using the best technique. So it's important that you're there with the students and making sure that they're playing with the correct technique. If they're not, you got to stop them and go through some of the troubleshooting processes to make sure that their left hands are set up correctly, their bows are set up correctly, so that they're making good sounds and that it sounds good. One thing that I also notice in class, this is a lot harder to accomplish, especially if there's only one teacher in the classroom, is to make sure that the students are using fingerings that are logical and that are practical to music that they might play in a concert music setting. Some of the scale books that are out there use kind of bizarre fingerings for different instruments, and I just don't see how they would ever come up in real music. And that's an issue, and some students just kind of invent their own fingerings. You know, I see like a lot of the cello fingerings where it's like 4, 4, 4, 4, 4, you know, and we don't really use that. It's not practical or logical, and so we need to make sure that the students are held accountable to fingerings And that might take some looking around the room and making sure that everybody's kind of doing the same thing. If you've got an assistant or if you've got a high school director coming in to help, that makes it much easier. You can kind of divide and conquer when it comes to that stuff and make sure that students are using appropriate fingerings for those scales. The more effort that you're putting into it, the more effort that the students are likely to put into it. And that's going to be a good thing because you want the students to try their best and you want them to actually play the scales and get something out of it other than just, going through the motions. A lot of classroom teachers use method books to teach shifting or to create experiences where students have to shift so that they get some repetition. And these etudes are likely to use some non-stepwise motion, so there's going to be some leaps, there's going to be some other things that might be even more practical, and they go through line by line and they play through it. But like the scales, we just need to make sure that we're not just going through the motions, that we're actually using good technique, playing with good sounds, and playing in tune. The method books will provide the class a melody or some kind of a line that everybody can play and make sound the same. But what it won't do for you is make sure that the technique is correct. And a lot of those method books don't really address too much technique at all. They just kind of give you stuff to play. Now let's think about this. Rather than going this line, this line, this line, this line all the way through the book, which is kind of overwhelming and a little bit boring and quite redundant, pick a couple of them on each page, pick a couple of them that you think are the most practical or important, and really perfect those and get the students sounding really good on those instead of playing everything in the book. I think it's better to play a couple of lines really well than a couple dozen lines really poorly. I think you're going to develop more skills that are transferable to concert music and even to sight reading, so that when a student goes on, you're not just teaching them the general concept of shifting, you're teaching them the quality that comes with the technique of proper shifting. If the students are playing a line and it's not going well, isolate, slow it down, go through some of the exercises, go through some of the troubleshooting steps and figure out what's not working well, learn those skills, then pick back up in that line and see if they can correct the mistakes, and then give them lots of repetition doing it with quality before going on to something else. My favorite thing to do in class is teach by rote. I like to come up with exercises that are practical and just play it on my violin first and have the students copy me, or come up with a situation or scenario to have the students do. And the reason why I like to do this is because it gets their heads out of a book, out of a music stand, and it gets them to watch me. And that's important because when I'm on stage conducting, I want the students to watch me and I want to have that connection to the students. And so every day we do rote exercises, and I like to develop that visual relationship with the students. So they're having to watch me so that they know what's going on and they can respond to me, and I can develop not just verbal coaching cues to get the students to do what I want to do, but I can also develop some visual cues as well, so that the visual cues end up taking the place of the verbal coaching cues. And that way, if we're on stage and something's not going right, I can sort of use a visual gesture to remind the students to do one thing or the other. And hopefully I can do it in a way that's a little sneaky and not so obvious to the audience. The disadvantage of rote teaching, of course, is going to be that the students lose the connection to written music, but I think that can be addressed also if you practice sight reading as a separate skill than you practice your shifting. And so in class, we'll sight read a little thing every single day. As we get closer to contests, we will sight read a lot more. We'll probably shadow bow and go through a short piece of music every single day in class to practice the sight reading skill. But when learning technique, I really like to do it by rote. I think it's more efficient, and I really like to develop that visual communication with myself and my orchestra classes. If you're using scales, etudes out of a book, rote exercises, or all three, that's awesome. Try to do a little bit every day once you've sequenced in shifting. And also try to make sure that it's of high quality and make sure that they're using good technique so that those skills are then transferable into the concert music instead of just in isolated instances. So I hope you found some of this information helpful. In the next videos, we're going to go over some demonstration exercises of some of the rote things that I like to do in class that help provide additional accountability and help make sure that the students are playing with good technique so that they're held accountable to that left-hand technique and to the bow, so that they have to do the technique in order to be able to do the exercise. So I hope you enjoy them, and I hope you benefit from them.